She's just a medic, Thorn. Stand down and let the trigger pullers handle this. The contempt in Sergeant Rex Thorn's voice was as thick and choking as the desert dust that clung to everything at Forward Operating Base Vigil. The small group of infantrymen gathered around the tactical map snickered, their nervous energy finding an easy release at the expense of the woman standing silently at the edge of their circle. She did not react. Her gaze remained fixed on the terrain model, her expression as placid and unreadable as the flat, sun-baked earth stretching out beyond the wire. She was a study in deliberate stillness, a rock in the turbulent river of their bravado. But when the old colonel, watching the drone feed from the dim, cool quiet of the Tactical Operations Center, saw the way she unconsciously shifted her weight, a subtle, almost imperceptible centering of balance that spoke not of medicine but of a lifetime spent on the firing line, he leaned closer to the monitor, a flicker of ancient memories stirring in his mind. He had seen that stance before, in places the history books would never mention, worn by people whose names were forever filed under layers of black ink and government secrecy. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to raise its voice, type competence below. This quiet medic, Specialist Anya Sharma, was about to teach Sergeant Thorne a lesson that would echo through the stone canyons of that desolate country, a lesson paid for not in words, but in the chilling, undeniable currency of single, perfectly placed rounds that would change the very definition of respect for every soldier who witnessed what was about to unfold. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was a coiled spring, a deep reservoir of experience held in reserve, waiting for the precise moment when action would speak with more thunderous authority than any boastful shout ever could. The other soldiers saw a support staffer, a necessary but peripheral piece of the great, violent machine. They saw her small frame, the clean, unscarred lines of her face, and the medic's patch on her sleeve, and their assumptions wrote a story of gentle hands and sterile gauze, not of the cold, hard calculus of ballistics and terminal velocity. Colonel Evans, however, saw the ghost of a different kind of professional, one whose work was measured in the silent fall of tyrants and the quiet prevention of wars, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled his blood, that the coming storm was about to meet a force of nature it had never anticipated, a quiet professional whose competence was about to become the stuff of legend. Sergeant Thorne, a man whose personality was a blunt instrument forged in the fires of a dozen pointless skirmishes, continued his tirade, his voice grating against the tense quiet of the command tent. He saw Sharma's lack of reaction not as discipline, but as weakness, a confirmation of his deeply ingrained prejudice. "Look at her," he sneered, gesturing with a greasy thumb. "Probably got her certification online. What are you going to do when the shooting starts, Specialist? Apply a bandage to a machine gun nest? Sing it a lullaby?" The laughter this time was louder, more confident. It was the sound of a pack affirming its hierarchy, and in their world, the world of hardened infantry, a quiet medic was at the very bottom. Sharma didn't even blink. Her attention was wholly consumed by her task. She was methodically checking the seals on her aid bag, her fingers moving with a practiced, almost hypnotic grace. Each pouch was opened, its contents inventoried by touch alone, and then secured with a crisp, satisfying snap. It was a ritual of quiet professionalism, a personal ceremony of readiness that stood in stark contrast to Thorne's loud, empty posturing. This meticulous care was a form of communication, though no one there was literate enough to read it. They failed to see the story told by the worn leather on the bag's handle, shaped by thousands of hours of carry. They missed the subtle, custom modifications to the straps, designed for optimal weight distribution during a long patrol, not a short walk from a vehicle. They couldn't decipher the meaning of the single, faded black star inked onto a small flap, a symbol so obscure it was meaningless to all but a select, vanished few. It was a marker of a tribe whose entrance exam was a crucible of unimaginable pain and whose graduation was a vow of eternal silence. Her focus was absolute, a shield against the casual cruelty of her environment. The world for her had shrunk to the simple, tactile reality of sterile packaging, the precise tension of a tourniquet strap, the reassuring weight of her morphine syringes. This was her domain, the known and controllable universe of her craft, and the noise of Thorne and his disciples was just weather, a passing squall of ignorance that would eventually blow itself out. She was building a wall of competence, brick by silent brick, and it was a fortress far more formidable than the sand-filled barriers that surrounded their precarious outpost in the middle of nowhere. The first mortar round landed with a deafening, soul-shaking crump that wasn't so much heard as it was felt, a percussive wave that slammed through the ground and up into their bones. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of sand, smoke, and panicked shouting. The casual, arrogant atmosphere of moments before evaporated, replaced by the primal, metallic taste of fear. The attack was sudden, brutally coordinated, and aimed with terrifying precision. Within seconds, the heavy machine gun nest on Overwatch Ridge, the linchpin of the FOB's northern defense, went silent. A lucky shot, a perfectly placed round, had found its mark. The panicked voice of a private crackled over the radio, high and thin with terror. "Sergeant, Gun 2 is down. They're gone. The whole crew is gone." A wave of enemy fighters, using the ensuing chaos as cover, began to pour through the gap in the wire the mortar had created, a tide of shadows and muzzle flashes advancing on their position. Sergeant Thorne, for all his bluster, was a creature of action. He began barking orders, trying to rally a new defensive line, but they were pinned down, suppressed by a withering fusillade of accurate, disciplined fire from the high ground. The enemy wasn't a disorganized militia. They were professionals, and they were systematically dismantling the FOB's defenses. Amidst the swirling chaos, Anya Sharma moved with a purpose that was unnervingly calm. There was no panic in her eyes, no hesitation in her movements. While others scrambled for cover or returned fire blindly, she moved with the fluid, economical grace of a predator. She didn't run. She flowed across the open ground, her profile low, her steps measured, each movement a calculated line from one piece of cover to the next. She reached the shattered remains of the machine gun nest, a place no one else dared to go. The scene was one of utter devastation. The soldiers who had been laughing at her just minutes ago were now silent forever. She spared them only a brief, professional glance, her mind already triaging, assessing, and discarding. They were beyond her help. Her mission had changed. Her hands, which had been so gently checking bandages, now moved with a different kind of purpose. They were no longer the hands of a healer. They were the hands of something else entirely. She bypassed the mangled bulk of the .50 caliber machine gun, its barrel twisted into a grotesque smile. Her eyes scanned the wreckage, finally landing on the M210 sniper rifle belonging to the squad's designated marksman, lying half-buried in the red dust next to its fallen owner. It was a tool she knew intimately, an old and terrible friend. She lifted the rifle from the dust. The action was smooth, a familiar weight in her hands. She did not need to check if a round was chambered. She could feel it, an extension of her own senses. Her movements were a symphony of practiced efficiency, a ballet of lethal competence performed under the harshest lights imaginable. She cleared a piece of shrapnel from the scope's lens with a soft puff of air. She settled into the earth behind the broken sandbags, becoming part of the landscape, her body a stable, unbreathing platform for the weapon. She was no longer Specialist Sharma, the medic. She was an instrument of pure, unadulterated skill. In the TOC, Colonel Evans watched the drone feed, his knuckles white on the edge of the console. "Get me a tight shot on the ridge," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. On the screen, the small, lone figure came into sharp focus. He saw the way she braced the rifle, the perfect pocket she formed in her shoulder, the way her cheek welded to the stock as if it were grown there. It was a posture of absolute mastery, a physical declaration of intent. Thorne, pinned down behind a crippled Humvee, could only watch in stunned disbelief as the medic he had ridiculed prepared to engage an entire enemy squad. "What in God's name does she think she's doing?" he yelled into his radio, his voice a mix of fury and confusion. "She's going to get herself killed." But then the first shot cracked through the din of the battle, a sharp, authoritative sound that was completely distinct from the chaotic rattle of automatic fire. It was the sound of a decision being made. A distant figure on the opposing ridge, the one carrying a radio, crumpled and fell. A beat of silence. Then another crack. The enemy machine gunner, who had been chewing up their position, slumped over his weapon. The silence that followed that second shot was deeper, more profound. It was the silence of dawning realization. The rhythm of the attack had been broken. The enemy's confidence was fractured. Crack. A third shot. The enemy squad leader, directing fire from behind a rock, dropped as if his strings had been cut. The shots were not just kills. They were surgical excisions, each one removing a critical piece of the enemy's command and control. One by one, the enemy squad was dismantled with a terrifying, methodical precision. There was no wasted motion, no follow-up shots. Just a single, cold report, followed by a falling man. The remaining attackers, their leadership gone and their morale shattered by this unseen, godlike accuracy, faltered. Their advance slowed, then stopped. They broke and ran, melting back into the rocks from which they had come. In the space of less than 30 seconds, a single, quiet medic had done what an entire platoon of infantry could not. She had broken the attack, single-handedly. And then, the most deafening sound on the battlefield washed over FOB vigil, complete and utter silence. In the aftermath, the silence was a physical entity, heavier than the smoke that drifted across the compound. The surviving soldiers slowly rose from their cover, their faces masks of shock and awe, their eyes fixed on the lone figure still prone and motionless on Overwatch Ridge. Sergeant Thorne lowered his rifle, his mouth hanging slightly open. The words he had spoken, the loud, arrogant insults, now hung in the air like poison, their foolishness laid bare for all to see. He had built his world on a foundation of simple, brutal assumptions, and that foundation had just been pulverized into dust by 8 perfectly placed rounds from a weapon fired by the very person he had deemed weakest. He felt a hot, unfamiliar shame crawl up his neck. He had not just been wrong. He had been profoundly, fundamentally ignorant. His entire understanding of strength, of what it meant to be a warrior, had been upended. He had mistaken silence for fear and quietude for incompetence. Now he understood. He had been in the presence of a professional of a caliber he couldn't even comprehend, and he had treated her like a child. The humiliation was absolute, not because someone had shamed him, but because his own arrogance had been so blindingly, publicly refuted by undeniable fact. He had been loud, and she had been effective. He had postured, and she had performed. The contrast was a brutal, unforgiving mirror reflecting his own inadequacy. In the TOC, Colonel Evans leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile touching his lips. He had seen enough. The memory that had been nagging at him clicked into place. The stance, the economy of motion, the impossible calm under fire. It was the signature of a very specific, very small, and very lethal community. "Get me Specialist Sharma's full service record," he ordered the comms technician. "And I mean the real one. You'll need my override codes. Top-level clearance. Look for a redacted file transfer from SOCOM." The technician's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, his eyes widened. He turned to the colonel, his face pale. "Sir, you need to see this." He swiveled the monitor around. Evans leaned forward, his eyes scanning the screen. The record was sparse, almost insultingly so, with vast sections blacked out. But the words that remained were all that mattered. Unit designation, classified. Primary specialty, Special Operations Direct Action / Counterterrorism. Combat deployments, 17. Awards, Silver Star, Bronze Star with V device, X3, Purple Heart, X2. And a string of other commendations, so secret they were listed only by a series of alphanumeric codes. Her previous rank was listed simply as redacted. The file was a ghost, the official biography of someone who was never supposed to exist. Colonel Evans keyed his command frequency, his voice cutting through the stunned silence on the net with the cold, hard authority of ultimate command. "All stations, this is Vigil 6. Cease all chatter." The radio discipline was immediate. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over every listening ear. "Overwatch Station," he said, his voice now devoid of any emotion. "This is Vigil 6. Good shooting." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Every single person on the net knew exactly who he was talking to. From the ridge, a single, calm female voice came back, devoid of triumph or emotion. "Vigil 6, Overwatch." Understood, it was the voice of a professional acknowledging a simple statement of fact. Then, Evans did something that sent a shockwave through the entire command structure. He switched to the common frequency, the one used by Thorne's platoon. "Thorne," he said, his voice dropping a full octave, becoming as sharp and deadly as broken glass. "Sergeant Thorne, do you copy?" Thorne, still standing dumbly by the Humvee, fumbled for his handset. "Yes, sir. Vigil 6. I copy, Thorne," the colonel continued, his words slow and deliberate, each one a hammer blow. "You are to take your men and secure the northern perimeter. You will then conduct a full battle damage assessment. But before you do any of that, I want you to look up at Overwatch Ridge. I want you to fix that image in your mind. The image of a true professional at work." The public nature of the rebuke was staggering. It wasn't just a correction, it was a lesson broadcast for all to hear. "There are people in this man's army, Sergeant," Evans' voice crackled, "who have forgotten more about combat than you will ever know. They don't wear their accomplishments on their sleeves, because their accomplishments are written in classified reports that you will never be cleared to read. They don't need to boast, because their deeds speak for themselves, in a language far older and more honest than words. They are quiet, they are competent, and they are owed your respect, whether you are smart enough to recognize them or not. Is that understood, Sergeant?" Thorne could barely breathe. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on him. "Yes, sir," he choked out, the words tasting like ash. Loud and clear, "Sir," the validation was complete. It wasn't just that Anya Sharma had been proven competent. It was that the entire institutional philosophy of loud, arrogant gatekeeping had been publicly tried, found wanting, and executed by the highest authority on the base. The quiet professional had not only won the battle, but she had also won the war for respect, and she had done it without saying a word in her own defense. The story of what happened at FOB Vigil spread faster than a brush fire in a high wind. It was told in hushed, reverent tones in the Chow Hall, whispered over crackling radios between remote outposts, and debated endlessly in the smoky confines of the makeshift NCO club. The legend of the quiet medic who had single-handedly broken a coordinated enemy assault became institutional folklore overnight. The details, as they always do, began to shift and embellish with each telling, acquiring the burnished patina of myth. Some said she hadn't used the scope at all, that she had fired from the hip. Others swore they had seen her taking apart the rifle and cleaning it during the firefight. The most popular version claimed she wasn't a medic at all, but some kind of ghost, an angel of death sent by the Pentagon itself to watch over them. The raw facts were incredible enough, but the legend was something more. It became a parable, a teaching story about the folly of assumptions. It was a powerful antidote to the cynical, chest-thumping culture that so often permeated the lower ranks. The name Anya Sharma was now spoken with a mixture of fear and profound respect. Soldiers would fall silent when she entered a room. They would watch her as she went about her duties, patching up cuts, treating heat exhaustion, and doling out medication, trying to reconcile the image of the calm, gentle healer with the terrifyingly efficient killer they had witnessed on the ridge. She was a living paradox, a walking embodiment of the warrior-healer archetype, and her quiet presence forced everyone to reconsider their simplistic definitions of strength. She deflected all questions and praise with the same unwavering, polite detachment. When a young private, his eyes wide with hero worship, asked her how she learned to shoot like that, she simply looked at him and said, "You pay attention to the fundamentals." She offered no more, no tales of daring raids or secret missions. Her past remained a locked box, and this only added to her mystique. Her silence was her shield, preserving the core of who she was from the prying, clumsy hands of others' expectations. She was what she was, a medic. That was her job today. What she was yesterday was no one's business but her own. She was a testament to the idea that a person's worth is not defined by the patch on their sleeve, but by the caliber of their character and the depth of their competence, qualities that require no announcement and seek no applause. The most profound transformation, however, took place within Sergeant Rex Thorne. The colonel's public rebuke had stripped him of his arrogance, leaving him raw and exposed. But it was not the shame that changed him, it was the awe. He had witnessed something that day that fundamentally altered his perception of reality. He had seen a level of skill, a state of grace under pressure, that he knew he could never achieve. It humbled him not just as a soldier, but as a man. He stopped shouting. He started listening. He began to watch his soldiers, not just for their flaws, but for their hidden strengths. He saw the quiet radio technician who could diagnose a complex system's failure by sound alone. He noticed the soft-spoken supply clerk who had organized the entire depot with a logic so brilliant it was practically an art form. He started to see the constellation of quiet professionals all around him, the invisible pillars that held the entire base together, and he realized he had been blind to them his entire career. His apology to Sharma was as quiet and understated as she was. He found her one evening after her shift, sitting alone, methodically cleaning the very M210 rifle she had used. It had been presented to her by the armorer as a gift of respect. She stripped it down and reassembled it with the fluid, thoughtless ease of a master craftsman. Thorn didn't say a word for a long time. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel. Finally, he stepped forward and placed a battered, but clean, metal canteen on the table beside her. "Figured you might be thirsty," he mumbled, not quite meeting her eyes. She paused her work, looked at the canteen, then up at him. Her eyes held no judgment, no lingering resentment. There was only a calm, quiet acceptance. She picked up the canteen, took a short drink, and then nodded once. "Thanks, Sergeant," she said. It was all that was needed. The gesture was the apology, and the nod was the forgiveness. In that single, quiet moment, a new and profound respect was forged, one built not on rank or reputation, but on a shared understanding of a difficult truth. The rifle itself became a symbol. A young soldier, an amateur artist, carved a small, elegant caduceus, the symbol of the medic, into its stock, right next to the trigger guard. The rifle was never fired again. It was mounted on the wall of the command post, a permanent reminder that the hands that heal can also be the hands that protect, and that the most dangerous person on the battlefield might not be the one who makes the most noise. Months later, a fresh batch of young, nervous soldiers arrived at FOB Vigil, their faces a mixture of bravado and barely concealed fear. They were gathered for their welcome briefing, not by a slick officer with a PowerPoint presentation, but by a grizzled master sergeant whose face was a roadmap of a dozen hard-won campaigns. He walked them to the edge of the perimeter, the sun setting behind him, casting long shadows across the valley. He didn't talk about rules or regulations. Instead, he pointed up towards the rocky outcrop that dominated the northern view. "See that ridge?" he began, his voice a low rumble. "We call that Sharma's Perch. Let me tell you a story." He recounted the tale of the attack, of the machine gun nest going down, and of the impossible shots fired from that very spot. He told them about the quiet medic who had refused to break, who had stood her ground when everyone else was falling back, and who had turned the tide of a battle with nothing but a borrowed rifle and a level of calm that defied human understanding. He made it a lesson, the first and most important one they would learn in this place. "Out here," the master sergeant concluded, his gaze sweeping over their young faces, "you will drop every assumption you've ever had. You do not judge the person next to you by their rank, their gender, their size, or the patch on their arm. You judge them by one thing and one thing only, their competence. You earn respect by your actions, not your words." Some of the most dangerous people I have ever met in my life never raised their voice. They just did the work. As he spoke, in the background, Specialist Anya Sharma could be seen doing just that. She was kneeling in the dust, patiently showing a new combat lifesaver how to properly apply a pressure dressing to a training dummy. Her voice was low and steady, her hands guiding his with gentle precision. She was anonymous in the crowd, just another soldier doing her job, seeking no credit, wanting no attention. Her legacy was not in the stories they told about her, but in the quiet, professional standard she set every single day. The lesson of her actions had become institutionalized, woven into the very fabric of the base's culture. She had proven that a legacy isn't a monument you build to yourself. It's the foundation you lay for others to build upon. Her competence had become the new standard, her silence the new ideal. True strength is a quiet river, not a raging flood. It flows deep and steady, carving canyons out of stone over millennia, while the flash flood is a loud, temporary spectacle that is quickly forgotten. In the end, the noise of arrogance always fades, leaving behind nothing but the echo of its own emptiness. What endures is the silent, irrefutable evidence of work well done. What lasts is the legacy of competence. The story of Anya Sharma became more than just a war story. It became a timeless lesson for anyone who has ever been underestimated, for anyone who has chosen the difficult path of quiet mastery over the easy road of loud self-promotion. It is a reminder that the world is changed not by those who declare their greatness, but by those who quietly, relentlessly, and professionally demonstrate it. Her actions on that dusty ridge did more than save a forward operating base. They restored a kind of moral clarity. They affirmed a universal truth, that respect is a debt owed to skill, that honor is the natural consequence of quiet courage, and that a person's true measure is found in the calm, steady space between a challenge and their response. The ripples of that day spread outward, carrying a simple but powerful message. Do not be deceived by appearances. Do not be swayed by volume. Look for the quiet ones, the observers, the methodical professionals who let their results speak for them. For it is in their silence that you will often find the deepest reserves of strength and the most profound expressions of human capability. Their work is their voice, their precision is their argument, and their legacy is not what they leave behind in stories, but what continues forward in the standards they set and the lives they inspire. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where professional skill defines a person's ultimate worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.